Hey Reddit, throwaway account here, because I honestly don't know how to process all of this. I need advice, or maybe I just need to vent. Either way, buckle up. This is a long one. Let me start by saying I thought I had a pretty solid marriage. My wife, Amanda, 34F, and I, Jake, 36M, have been together for 8 years, married for 5. We don't have kids, but we build a nice, predictable life together. I have a 9 to 5 office job, and Amanda works part-time from home as a graphic designer. For the longest time, I thought things were fine, normal even. We had our routines. Every Friday, we'd order takeout and watch crappy reality TV. Every Sunday, Amanda would insist on walking to the local supermarket a couple of blocks from our house. She claimed it was for fresh air, but honestly, I think she just liked having an excuse to shop without me rushing her. The store became her thing. She went there every other day, chatting up the workers and coming home with whatever was on sale. She always had stories about the people who worked there, too. Janet from the bakery gave me free samples again, or the guy in Produce told me the apples weren't fresh today. I didn't think much of it. It's a neighborhood store. Of course, she'd get friendly with the employees. One guy came up in conversation more often than the others, Matt. Matt was 27, worked in the deli, and according to Amanda, was hilarious. She'd talk about the stupid jokes he'd tell, or how he always convinced her to try a new kind of cheese. I didn't care. I mean, why would I? Amanda is beautiful, but she's also opinionated and fiery. If anything, I felt bad for the guy having to deal with her picky sandwich orders all the time. Looking back, I should have noticed something. The way she lit up when she talked about the store, how she started dressing up more for her quick runs, or the fact that she suddenly had a favorite sandwich that she'd never even mentioned liking before. But I didn't. It all seemed harmless. Right up until the cracks in our perfect routine began to show. I'll never forget the day things started to unravel. It was a Thursday evening, and Amanda had gone out for one of her walks to the store. I didn't think much of it at first. She'd been doing this for years. But then 2 hours passed, and she still wasn't home. I called her, but it went straight to voicemail. Weird. Amanda was usually glued to her phone. I told myself she must have run into someone she knew and got caught up talking. Still, something felt off. Around 9 p.m., I decided to take a drive to clear my head. It wasn't like Amanda to stay out late without a word, and I needed to do something other than sit around worrying. I figured I'd loop around the neighborhood and maybe swing by the store to see if she was still there. That's when I saw them. Parked in a dark corner of the supermarket lot was Amanda's car. I almost drove past it, assuming she was finally on her way home, but then I noticed something. Her driver's seat was reclined all the way back, and there was movement inside the car. 2 figures locked together. My stomach dropped. I pulled into a nearby spot, the adrenaline surging through me as I got out of my car and walked closer. My mind raced with all the ways I could be wrong about what I was seeing. Maybe it wasn't Amanda. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But as I got closer, there was no mistaking it. Amanda was in the driver's seat, her blouse half off, straddling a guy who could only be Matt, the deli worker. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, frozen. Then Amanda glanced over her shoulder and saw me. Her face twisted in horror, and she scrambled off of Matt, yanking her blouse back into place. "Jake, what the hell?" she shrieked, as if I was the one who'd done something wrong. "What the hell am I doing?" I shouted back, my voice shaking with rage. "What the fuck are you doing, Amanda?" Matt looked like he wanted to disappear into the floorboards. He muttered something about leaving and bolted out of the car, leaving Amanda and me alone in the parking lot. "I can explain," Amanda said, her voice rising into hysteria. "Oh, I can't wait to hear this one," I spat. "It's not what it looks like," she shouted, her voice frantic. I wasn't thinking straight. "It was a mistake, Jake." I laughed bitterly, gesturing toward the car. "A mistake? So what? Your clothes just fell off, and he accidentally ended up underneath you." She glared at me, her defensiveness kicking into high gear. "Don't you dare talk to me like that. You don't know what it's been like. You're always busy with work, always distracted. I needed someone to pay attention to me." The sheer audacity of her words left me speechless. "This is how you deal with it?" I said finally, my voice trembling with anger. "By screwing the deli guy in a parking lot?" Amanda crossed her arms, her face twisting into a sneer. "Don't act like you're some perfect husband, Jake. You've been checked out for years. Maybe if you paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have had to find it somewhere else." The words hit me like a slap. I wanted to yell, to argue, to tell her how wrong she was, but I couldn't. My mind was spinning, the betrayal cutting deeper with every second. Go home, I said through gritted teeth. Jake, please. I said, go home, I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty lot. Amanda hesitated, then got in her car and sped off, leaving me standing alone under the harsh glow of the parking lot lights. I stayed there for a long time, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My wife, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. And somehow, it was only the beginning. When I got home, Amanda was sitting on the couch, her arms crossed and her face red with anger. There you are, she snapped as if she had the right to be mad at me. Are you done throwing your little tantrum? I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. My tantrum? Amanda, I just caught you having sex with another man. Do you even hear yourself right now? She rolled her eyes, a cruel smirk tugging at her lips. Oh, grow up, Jake. It's not like we have the most passionate marriage anymore. People make mistakes. Mistakes? I repeated, my voice rising. You've been sneaking around with that guy for who knows how long, and you call it a mistake? Her expression darkened, her tone turning venomous. You don't get to play the victim here. Do you even know how lonely I've been? You're always working late or glued to your laptop. It's like I don't even exist to you anymore. I could barely believe what I was hearing. So, your solution was to sleep with Matt? The guy who makes your sandwiches? That's your justification? She stood up, her hands on her hips. At least he listens to me. At least he makes me feel wanted, Jake, which is more than I can say for you. I shook my head, my hands trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. You're unbelievable. Instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix whatever issues you think we have, you decide to throw away our marriage in a parking lot. Amanda scoffed, brushing past me toward the kitchen. You're being dramatic. It's not like I love him or anything. It was just an escape. An escape, I echoed bitterly. From what? A husband who works his ass off to give you a good life? She turned to glare at me, her face twisting into an ugly sneer. You want to know the truth? Fine. You're boring, Jake. Our whole life is boring. Every day it's the same damn thing. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. At least Matt made things exciting. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth to argue, to defend myself, but the realization hit me. There was no point. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't even trying to salvage what we had. For the first time that night, I felt something other than anger. I felt done. Pack a bag, I said quietly. She blinked, caught off guard. What? You heard me, I said, my voice steady. Pack a bag and get out. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here tonight. Amanda's face twisted in fury. You're kicking me out? Are you serious right now? Dead serious, I replied. This is my house, Amanda. You don't get to cheat on me and then act like nothing's wrong. Get out. She stared at me, her eyes narrowing. Phoenix, but don't think this is over, Jake. You're not as innocent as you think you are. Her words stung, but I held my ground as she stomped upstairs to pack. When she finally left, slamming the door behind her, the silence that filled the house was deafening. I sat on the couch, my head in my hands, trying to process what had just happened. My wife, my partner, my best friend, had betrayed me, and somehow she turned it into my fault. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. This wasn't just about Amanda's infidelity. It was about the lies, the manipulation, the complete lack of remorse. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me. The next morning, I made an appointment with a divorce lawyer. The morning after kicking Amanda out, I barely slept. My mind was still reeling from everything. The betrayal, her cold indifference, and her audacity to shift the blame onto me. But there was one thing I was sure of. I needed to protect myself. I called a divorce lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Hayes who came highly recommended by a coworker. By the afternoon, I was sitting in her office, recounting the events of the previous night. Evelyn listened carefully, taking notes as I spoke. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. Infidelity is a clear-cut reason for divorce, she said. But if she contests it, things could get messy, especially if you're both emotionally charged. I nodded, trying to keep my emotions in check. I just want this to be over. She can have whatever she wants, as long as I don't have to deal with her anymore. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. I understand the sentiment, but don't be so quick to give up everything. If she's been dishonest about the affair, who knows what else she might be hiding? Her words gave me pause. Amanda had lied so easily about her relationship with Matt. What else could she have kept from me? Do you think I should investigate? I asked hesitantly. Evelyn smiled faintly. It wouldn't hurt. The more information you have, the stronger your position will be. She recommended a private investigator, a grizzled old man named Frank who looked like he'd seen it all. When I explained my situation, he nodded knowingly. Cheaters usually slip up in more ways than one, he said. I'll dig around, see if there's anything else you need to know. I gave him all the details I could, Amanda's frequent trips to the store, her phone habits, and her connection to Matt. Frank promised to get back to me within a week, and I left his office feeling a strange mix of dread and anticipation. Back at home, the emptiness of the house felt oppressive. Amanda hadn't called or texted since she left, which was both a relief and a reminder of how quickly things had spiraled. I spent the evening sorting through old photos and memories, trying to reconcile the woman I'd loved with the stranger she'd become. The first twist came 2 days later when Frank called. "Got something you need to see," he said, his voice low. We met at a diner near his office, where he slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were photos and documents that made my stomach drop. Amanda and Matt weren't just having an affair. They were spending money I didn't even know we had. There were receipts for expensive dinners, hotel stays, and even gifts Amanda had bought for Matt. But the kicker? A deposit slip for $15,000, taken out of our joint savings account last month. "She's been funneling money into a separate account," Frank said. "This isn't just infidelity, it's financial betrayal." I stared at the papers, my hands trembling with rage. Amanda hadn't just cheated on me, she'd stolen from me. "You think Matt's in on this?" I asked. Frank shrugged. "Hard to say, but it's possible. People like him don't stick around unless they're getting something out of it." My mind raced as I tried to process the revelation. Amanda hadn't just destroyed our marriage. She'd undermined the very foundation of trust I'd built my life on. That evening, as I sat alone in the house, a new thought struck me. What if this wasn't just about her dissatisfaction with our marriage? What if she and Matt were planning something bigger? I didn't know the answer, but one thing was clear. I couldn't let Amanda get away with this. The morning after Frank's revelation, I woke up with a singular focus. Amanda needed to explain herself. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the money, the lies, and what she'd been planning behind my back. I texted her, demanding she meet me at the house. To my surprise, she replied almost immediately. "Fine, be there at noon." When she arrived, she had the audacity to act like nothing was wrong. Dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, she strolled into the living room as if we were about to discuss what to order for dinner. "What's this about?" she asked, feigning annoyance. I held up the folder Frank had given me and tossed it onto the coffee table. "Care to explain this?" Her eyes darted to the papers, and for a split second, I saw a panic flash across her face. But then she recovered, crossing her arms defensively. "What, are you spying on me now?" she snapped. "That's pathetic, Jake." "You're stealing from me, Amanda," I shot back. $15,000 from our savings gone. Hotel stays, gifts for Matt. How long did you think you could get away with this? She scoffed, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "Oh, please. I took that money because I needed it. You've been so controlling with our finances. I had no choice." "Controlling?" I repeated, my voice rising. "We've always made financial decisions together, and you didn't need that money. You used it to bankroll your affair." Amanda rolled her eyes, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, give me a break, Jake. It's not like I emptied the account. And for your information, Matt had nothing to do with the money." "Then why take it?" I demanded. "What the hell were you planning to do?" She hesitated, her mask of confidence slipping for the first time. "I needed a safety net, okay? In case things didn't work out." The implication hit me like a punch to the gut. Amanda had been preparing to leave me, siphoning money out of our savings to start a new life, probably with Matt. "You've been planning this all along," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "No, I haven't," she said quickly, her tone shifting to one of desperation. I didn't know what else to do. You've been so checked out lately, Jake. I felt like I was on my own." Her attempt to shift the blame only fueled my anger. "Don't you dare put this on me," I snapped. "You've been lying to me, cheating on me, and stealing from me. Don't act like you're the victim here." Amanda's expression hardened, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out. But instead, she said something that stopped me cold. "Do you really think our marriage was ever going to work?" she said, her voice low and venomous. "You're boring, Jake. Safe. You gave me stability, but you never gave me excitement. And Matt made me feel alive again." Her words cut deeper than I thought possible. I stared at her, trying to process the sheer cruelty of what she'd just said. "You're unbelievable," I said finally. "Do you even hear yourself? You threw away our marriage for some supermarket fling, and now you're trying to justify it by calling me boring." She shrugged, her indifference twisting the knife even further. "Maybe I am, but at least I'm honest about what I want." For the first time in my life, I felt truly done. Amanda wasn't just unfaithful. She was toxic, selfish, and incapable of taking responsibility for her actions. "You need to leave," I said coldly. She stared at me, stunned. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said, my voice firm. "Take whatever you need and get out." "We're done, Amanda. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce." Her face twisted in anger, and she let out a bitter laugh. "You think you could just kick me out? This is my house too, Jake." "Not anymore," I replied, my tone unyielding. Amanda stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. For a moment, I felt a sense of relief, but it didn't last long. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a message from Frank. "Found something you need to see. It's big." My heart sank as I read his words. Whatever he discovered, I had a feeling it was about to make everything even worse. Frank's text left me on edge. I called him immediately, and his tone on the other end was serious. "Jake, you need to come to my office," he said. "I've uncovered something you're not going to believe." An hour later, I was sitting across from Frank, who slid another manila folder toward me. My hands trembled as I opened it, dreading what I'd find. Inside were more documents, bank statements, property records, and a photo that made my stomach drop. It was Amanda, sitting in a car with a man who wasn't Matt. This guy was older, well-dressed, and unmistakably wealthy. They weren't kissing or doing anything overtly incriminating, but the look on Amanda's face, leaning toward him with a sly smile, told me everything I needed to know. "Who the hell is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "His name's Richard Owens," Frank said, CEO of a real estate company downtown. "He's been meeting Amanda for months." I stared at him, struggling to process the information. "So she's been cheating with him too?" "It's more complicated than that," Frank said, pulling out another set of papers. "Amanda didn't just siphon money from your account. She's been moving it into an account tied to Richard's company. From what I can tell, they've been using it as a slush fund for something." "A slush fund?" I repeated, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "For what?" Frank shrugged. "Could be anything. Business deals, personal expenses, or even blackmail. Whatever it is, she's in deep." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me. Amanda wasn't just cheating with Matt. She was involved with someone else, someone who clearly had a lot more to lose. Why would she do this? I muttered, more to myself than to Frank. Frank hesitated before answering. "My guess? She's playing both sides. Matt was probably her fun, but Richard, he's the one with the money and connections." The thought made my blood boil. Amanda hadn't just betrayed me. She turned our entire marriage into some kind of game, using me as a safety net while she chased after excitement and wealth. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice shaking. Frank leaned forward, his gaze steady. "You have options, Jake. You can use this to your advantage in the divorce, but you need to tread carefully. If Richard gets wind of this, he'll do everything he can to cover his tracks, and Amanda's." I nodded, trying to absorb his advice. But deep down, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let Amanda get away with this. That evening, I confronted her. "Who's Richard?" I asked as soon as she walked through the door. Amanda froze, her eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," I snapped, tossing the photo onto the coffee table. "I know about him. I know about the account, the meetings, everything." Her face went pale, but she quickly recovered, crossing her arms defensively. "You've been spying on me again? God, Jake, you're pathetic. Don't you dare turn this around on me," I said, my voice rising. "You've been lying to me for years, Amanda. First Matt, and now this guy? How many men have there been?" She rolled her eyes, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, please. It's not what you think. Then explain it, I demanded. Explain the account, the money, the meetings. Because right now, it looks like you're screwing Richard just like you were screwing Matt. Her face twisted into a sneer. You really think you're so smart, don't you? Fine. I was meeting with Richard, but it wasn't about sex. It was about business. Business? I repeated, incredulous. Yes, business, she said, her tone defiant. Richard offered me an investment opportunity, something you'd never understand because you're too busy playing it safe all the time. I took the money because I wanted to build something for myself. By stealing from me? I shouted. It's not stealing if it's half mine, she snapped back. And if you weren't such a control freak, I wouldn't have had to hide it from you. Her audacity left me speechless. Amanda didn't just refuse to take responsibility. She genuinely believed she was in the right. Get out, I said quietly. She blinked, caught off guard. What? I said, get out. I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. I'm done, Amanda. You've lied, cheated, and stolen from me. There's nothing left to save. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. Amanda stormed out, slamming the door behind her. But as I sat in the silence of the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Richard was powerful, and Amanda wasn't the type to give up without a fight. The worst was yet to come. After Amanda stormed out, I thought I'd have a moment to breathe, to finally process everything that had happened. But Amanda wasn't the type to stay quiet. By the next morning, she was already working to turn the tables on me. It started with a text. You've lost to Jake. You're paranoid and obsessive. Maybe you should look in the mirror before accusing me of ruining this marriage. I ignored it, but the messages kept coming. You've been controlling since day one. No wonder I needed someone who actually listens to me. It's sad how desperate you are. Spying on me? Really? Pathetic. By the time my phone buzzed for the 5th time, I was ready to throw it across the room. She's trying to gaslight you, Frank said when I called to vent about her messages. Classic move. Make you question yourself so she can get the upper hand. I'm not falling for it, I said firmly. But Amanda wasn't content with just texting. She showed up at the house later that afternoon, unannounced and unapologetic. You can't just throw me out, Jake, she said the moment I opened the door. This is my house too. You walked out, I replied coldly. What are you doing here? Her lips twisted into a mockery of a smile. Oh, don't worry. I'm not here to grovel. I just came to remind you that you're not as innocent as you like to think. Excuse me? I said, my voice rising. She stepped inside, ignoring my protests. You're so busy playing the victim. But have you ever stopped to think about your role in all of this? You're the one who ignored me for years. You're the one who buried himself in work while I sat at home, alone. I stared at her, my anger boiling just below the surface. And that justifies stealing from me? Cheating on me? She shrugged, her tone flippant. I don't owe you an explanation, Jake. You weren't there when I needed you. So yeah, I found someone who was. Her words were like poison, designed to make me doubt myself. But I refused to let her get to me. You're unbelievable, I said, shaking my head. You're trying to rewrite history to make yourself look like the victim. Maybe I am the victim, she snapped. You think you're some perfect husband, but you're not. You never were. I couldn't take it anymore. Get out, Amanda, I said, my voice trembling with anger. Get out, and don't come back. She glared at me, her eyes blazing. Fine, but don't think for a second that this is over. She slammed the door on her way out, leaving me standing there, fists clenched and heart pounding. Later that night, I got a call from Frank. Jake, I've been looking into Richard Owens, he said. You're not going to like what I found. What is it? I asked, dread settling in my chest. Richard's company has been involved in several lawsuits over the years, fraud, embezzlement, you name it. He's got a reputation for using people and tossing them aside when they're no longer useful. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. Sounds like Amanda picked the perfect guy. Frank hesitated before continuing. That's not all. Richard's lawyers are aggressive. If Amanda's tied to him financially, you could end up collateral damage if this escalates. My stomach sank. I thought I'd reached the peak of Amanda's betrayal, but it seemed the fallout was only just beginning. The next morning, Frank's warning about Richard hung over me like a storm cloud. I'd been bracing myself for Amanda's chaos, but now I had a new problem. a powerful man with deep pockets and a reputation for silencing his enemies. It didn't take long for Richard to make his presence known. I was leaving the office that evening when I noticed a sleek black car idling near the entrance. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but as I walked toward my own car, the driver's window rolled down, and there he was, Richard Owens. "Jake Hart, right?" he said, his voice smooth and composed. I froze. "What do you want?" Richard smiled, a shark-like expression that didn't reach his eyes. "We need to talk about Amanda." I clenched my fists, anger flaring in my chest. "I don't think there's anything to talk about." "On the contrary," he replied, stepping out of the car. He was taller than I expected, exuding an air of authority that made my skin crawl. "Amanda's made some poor choices lately, and I'm here to make sure you don't escalate things unnecessarily." I stared at him, struggling to keep my composure. "Escalate things? She cheated on me. She stole from me. I'm the one cleaning up her mess." Richard chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You don't understand, Jake. This isn't just about your little domestic drama. Amanda's involvement with me is more complicated than you realize." "What the hell are you talking about?" I demanded. He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "Let's just say Amanda and I have a mutually beneficial arrangement. And if you keep digging, you're going to make things very unpleasant for everyone involved, including yourself." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. "Are you threatening me?" I asked, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. "I'm giving you a warning," Richard replied, his tone calm. "Drop the divorce, stop looking into my business, and let Amanda handle her affairs. Otherwise, I'll have no choice but to involve my legal team. And trust me, Jake, you don't want that." I stood there, staring at him, a million thoughts racing through my mind. Richard wasn't just Amanda's lover. He was her accomplice, her enabler. And now he was trying to intimidate me into submission. "Get the hell out of my face," I said through gritted teeth. Richard's smile widened. "Suit yourself. But don't say I didn't warn you." He climbed back into his car and drove off, leaving me standing in the parking lot, fists clenched and heart pounding. Back at home, I called Frank and told him what had happened. "He's trying to scare you," Frank said. "Don't let him. Guys like Richard thrive on intimidation, but the fact that he confronted you means he's worried. Keep pushing." But it wasn't just about pushing back against Richard anymore. It was about protecting myself. The next day, I met with Evelyn, my lawyer, and laid everything out. Amanda's affair with Matt, her financial connection to Richard, and Richard's thinly veiled threats. "This changes things," Evelyn said, her brow furrowing as she took notes. "If Richard's tied to Amanda's actions, we can use that to strengthen your case. But we need solid evidence." I nodded, determination hardening in my chest. "Whatever it takes, I'm not letting them ruin my life." That evening, I received another text, this time from Amanda. "I heard you talk to Richard. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Jake. Just let it go." The audacity of her message made my blood boil. She wasn't just complicit in Richard's schemes. She was actively working with him to cover their tracks. I replied with a single sentence, "We'll see about that." As I sat in the silence of my living room, a new thought struck me. What if Amanda wasn't just trying to leave me? What if she and Richard were planning to take everything I had? Frank worked fast after my encounter with Richard, digging into Amanda's financial moves and her connection to his company. Each new piece of information painted a darker picture of their involvement. "Jake, this goes deeper than I thought," Frank said when we met at his office. He handed me another folder, thicker than the last one. Inside were documents detailing Amanda's withdrawals from our accounts, but it didn't stop there. She hadn't just been funneling money into Richard's slush fund. She'd also signed off on loans in my name. Loans I hadn't even known existed. "This is fraud," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "She's been forging my signature." Frank nodded grimly. "And here's the kicker. The loans are tied to one of Richard's shell companies. If they default, and trust me, they will, you're the one who'll be on the hook." I stared at the documents, a sinking feeling settling in my gut. Amanda wasn't just stealing from me. She was setting me up to take the fall for her and Richard's schemes. "This can't be legal," I said. "It's not," Frank replied. "But proving it in court will be tricky. Richard's got a lot of resources, and he's good at covering his tracks. That's why we need more evidence." Frank's words fueled my determination. I wasn't just fighting for my dignity anymore. I was fighting for my financial survival. That evening, I went through our home office, searching for anything Amanda might have left behind. It didn't take long to find a stash of papers in a drawer she rarely used. Among the receipts and random notes was a contract, signed by Amanda and Richard, detailing an investment in one of his real estate projects. The investment was for $50,000. The contract made it clear that Amanda had committed the money from our joint account, and if the project failed, the debt would fall solely on me. My hands shook as I read the document, fury and betrayal coursing through me. Amanda had essentially gambled our future on Richard's scam, and now she was trying to leave me to deal with the fallout. I called Evelyn and forwarded her the contract. "This is exactly what we need," she said. "It's proof that Amanda acted without your consent and tied you to Richard's fraudulent deals. If we play this right, we can shift the liability onto them." Her words gave me a glimmer of hope, but I knew the fight wasn't over. Amanda and Richard wouldn't go down without a fight. The next day, I received an email from Richard's lawyer, threatening to sue me for defamation if I continued to investigate his company. "You're poking the bear," Evelyn said when I forwarded her the email. "But that's a good thing. It means they're feeling the pressure." Feeling the pressure or not, Richard wasn't backing down. Later that night, I received another text from Amanda. "You're making a mistake, Jake. Walk away before it's too late." I didn't reply. Instead, I focused on gathering as much evidence as I could. Frank uncovered more documents tying Amanda and Richard to shady deals, while Evelyn prepared a countersuit to protect me from their inevitable attacks. But the deeper we dug, the more dangerous things became. One evening, I came home to find my front door slightly ajar. My heart raced as I stepped inside, half expecting to find Amanda or one of Richard's goons waiting for me. The house was empty, but my office had been ransacked. Papers were strewn across the desk, and the folder containing Frank's findings was missing. I called the police, but there wasn't much they could do without evidence of who had broken in. "It was them," I told Frank the next morning. "They're trying to cover their tracks." "Let them," he replied. "The harder they push, the more mistakes they'll make." His confidence gave me a small sense of reassurance, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Amanda and Richard were always one step ahead. As I sat in the wreckage of my office that night, I realized the fight wasn't just about exposing their schemes. It was about survival. The break-in left me rattled, but it also made one thing clear. Amanda and Richard were getting desperate. They'd crossed every line imaginable to protect themselves, and I knew their next move would be even more brazen. It didn't take long for Amanda to make her play. 2 days after the break-in, I received a letter from her lawyer. The accusations were outrageous. Amanda claimed I had been emotionally abusive during our marriage and was attempting to financially control her through the divorce proceedings. "She's turning this into a smear campaign," Evelyn said when I showed her the letter. "It's a classic move. Paint yourself as the victim to sway public opinion and gain leverage in court." "She's lying," I said, fury bubbling beneath the surface. "I've never done anything to her." "I know," Evelyn replied, "but we need to prove it. This isn't just about discrediting her claims. It's about showing the court who the real manipulators are." I spent the next few days working with Evelyn and Frank to gather character references, old emails, and anything else that could counter Amanda's accusations. Meanwhile, Amanda doubled down on her narrative. She started spreading rumors among our mutual friends, painting me as a controlling, unhinged husband who couldn't handle her independence. People I'd known for years began pulling away, clearly unsure of who to believe. The final blow came when Amanda went to the police and filed a restraining order against me. I was blindsided. The order claimed I had threatened her during our last confrontation and was harassing her by investigating her financial activities. "This is serious, Jake," Evelyn said when I told her. "A restraining order could impact the divorce proceedings and make it harder to prove your case." "She's weaponizing the system," I said bitterly. "She's trying to make me look like the villain." Evelyn nodded. "And we're going to fight back. But you need to be careful. Follow the order to the letter, and don't contact Amanda directly. Let me handle the communication from here." I agreed, but the restraining order felt like a gut punch. Amanda wasn't just trying to ruin me financially. She was attacking my character, my integrity, and everything I'd worked to build. That night, Frank called with another revelation. "I've been digging into Richard's financials," he said. "Turns out he's been shifting assets to offshore accounts. He's preparing to cut ties and disappear." The news hit me like a ton of bricks. If Richard vanished, Amanda would be left holding the bag, and she'd likely pin everything on me to save herself. We need to move fast, I said, before they can pull the plug. The next morning, Evelyn filed an emergency motion to subpoena Richard's financial records and freeze Amanda's accounts. It was a bold move, but one that could force their hand. Amanda's reaction was immediate. She showed up at my office unannounced, her face a mask of fury. "You think you can outsmart me?" she hissed as she stormed into the lobby. "Leave, Amanda," I said coldly, refusing to engage. She stepped closer, her voice lowering to a venomous whisper. "You have no idea what you've started, Jake. You're going to regret this." Before I could respond, security arrived and escorted her out. But her parting words lingered in my mind, a reminder that Amanda wasn't finished with her games. Later that day, Evelyn called with an update. "The court approved the subpoenas," she said. "We'll have access to Richard's records by the end of the week." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Amanda and Richard had spent months building their web of lies, but it was finally starting to unravel. But even as the tide turned in my favor, I couldn't shake the feeling that Amanda had one last trick up her sleeve. The subpoenas marked a turning point, but I knew better than to get comfortable. Amanda and Richard were desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. It wasn't long before Amanda played her next card, a move so calculated and cruel that it left me reeling. I was at home, reviewing documents Evelyn had sent over, when I got a call from Frank. His tone was sharp, more urgent than usual. "Jake, we've got a problem," he said. "Amanda's gone to the media." "What?" I asked, my heart sinking. "She's feeding them her side of the story," Frank explained. "Claims you've been abusive and controlling, that you're using your connections to ruin her financially. It's all bullshit, but it's gaining traction." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "How bad is it?" "It's bad," Frank admitted. "A couple of local outlets are running with it. And guess who's backing her claims? Richard." I clenched my fists, fury bubbling inside me. Richard wasn't just manipulating Amanda. He was actively trying to destroy my reputation. "Do we have a way to counter this?" I asked. "We're working on it," Frank said. "But you need to prepare yourself. This is going to get messy." He wasn't kidding. By the next day, my name was plastered across headlines, accompanied by Amanda's fabricated sob story. She painted herself as the victim of an overbearing husband who couldn't handle her independence, while Richard's lawyers hinted at my questionable tactics in the divorce. I was furious, but more than that, I was hurt. Amanda had taken our private battle and turned it into a public spectacle, dragging my name through the mud to cover up her own lies. Evelyn called that afternoon, her voice calm but firm. "This is a strategic move," she said. "They're trying to force you into a corner, hoping you'll back off to avoid the public scrutiny. But if we keep our heads down and focus on the evidence, we can turn this around." Her words gave me some comfort, but the damage had already been done. Friends and colleagues started distancing themselves, unsure of what to believe. Even my boss pulled me aside to ask if everything was okay. "Just a messy divorce," I said, forcing a smile. But inside, I was falling apart. The final betrayal came a few days later, when Frank uncovered the last piece of the puzzle. "Jake," he said over the phone, his voice heavy. "I've been following the money trail, and it's worse than we thought." "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself. "The account Amanda's been funneling money into. It's in your name," he said. "And Richard's lawyers just filed a suit claiming you were the mastermind behind the fraudulent loans." I froze, the weight of his words sinking in. "They're framing me?" "Exactly," Frank said. "Amanda's been helping Richard build a paper trail that makes it look like you were in on the schemes. If they pull this off, you could be facing criminal charges." The room spun around me as the full scope of their betrayal hit me. Amanda hadn't just cheated on me or stolen from me. She'd set me up to take the fall for her and Richard's crimes. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We fight," Frank said. "We've got the evidence to prove your innocence, but it's going to take time. And we need to move fast before they can bury us in court." That night, as I sat in the wreckage of my life, I realized just how far Amanda and Richard were willing to go. This wasn't just about ruining me. It was about erasing me completely. But if they thought I was going to roll over and take it, they were wrong. After Frank's revelation, I knew there was no time to waste. Amanda and Richard weren't just trying to destroy my reputation. They were positioning me as the fall guy for their fraudulent schemes. If they succeeded, I'd lose everything. I met with Evelyn and Frank early the next morning, the tension in the room palpable. "This is a coordinated attack," Evelyn said, tapping a stack of documents on her desk. "Amanda and Richard are framing you, using your name to tie you to the fraudulent loans. But they're sloppy. We have a trail of evidence showing who's really behind this." Frank nodded. "The key is Richard's offshore accounts. If we can prove that the money Amanda funneled came from him and was used for his personal projects, it'll blow their case apart." "And Amanda?" I asked, my voice tight. Evelyn sighed. "She's complicit, but if she's smart, she'll turn on Richard to save herself." I doubted Amanda would ever admit the truth, but I didn't care. I was done trying to understand her motives. All I wanted was to clear my name and get her out of my life for good. Evelyn filed an emergency motion to freeze Richard's accounts and subpoena additional records. At the same time, Frank worked on tracking down former employees and business partners who could testify against Richard. The next few days were a blur of legal meetings and strategy sessions. Every step felt like climbing a mountain, but I refused to back down. Then came the hearing. Richard's lawyers were aggressive, painting me as the mastermind behind the loans and accusing me of using Amanda as a scapegoat. Amanda sat in the gallery, her expression a mix of defiance and guilt. But Evelyn was relentless. She presented a mountain of evidence tying Richard to the fraudulent loans, including forged documents and testimony from Frank about the offshore accounts. The turning point came when Evelyn revealed a recorded conversation between Amanda and Richard that Frank had uncovered. In the recording, Amanda expressed doubts about their plan. "Are you sure this will work?" she asked. "Jake's not stupid. He's going to figure it out." "Let him," Richard replied, his voice calm and calculating. "By the time he does, it'll be too late for him to stop us." The courtroom fell silent as the recording played, the weight of Richard's words hanging in the air. Amanda's face turned pale, and even Richard's lawyers looked shaken. When the hearing ended, Evelyn was confident we'd done enough to stop Richard's lawsuit. But it wasn't over yet. Outside the courthouse, Amanda cornered me. "You think you've won?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "I don't think," I replied coldly. "I know." Her eyes flashed with anger, but there was something else there too, fear. She knew her alliance with Richard was crumbling, and she was running out of options. "Jake, we don't have to do this," she said, her tone shifting to one of desperation. "We can fix this. We can still—" "No," I said firmly. "You've done enough damage, Amanda. There's no fixing this." She glared at me, tears welling in her eyes. But I felt no sympathy. Amanda had made her choices, and now she was going to face the consequences. As she walked away, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my life again. But the fight wasn't over yet. Frank called later that evening with another update. "We've got Richard backed into a corner," he said. "But he's not going down without a fight. Be ready for anything." I nodded, determination hardening in my chest. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about justice. I thought we'd seen the worst Amanda and Richard could throw at us, but I was wrong. Just when it seemed like we had the upper hand, they made their most devastating move yet. The morning started normally enough. Evelyn was preparing our final arguments for the next hearing, and Frank had uncovered more evidence tying Richard to the fraudulent loans. We were on track to dismantle their case entirely. But then my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Jake Hart?" A woman's voice said, cold and professional. "Yes," I replied, my stomach tightening. "This is Detective Lauren Hayes with the Financial Crimes Unit. We've received a formal complaint alleging your involvement in fraudulent real estate transactions. We need you to come in for questioning." The floor seemed to drop out from beneath me. I don't understand," I stammered. "This has to be a mistake. There's substantial documentation tying you to the case," she continued. "We suggest you cooperate fully. Failure to do so could result in legal action." The call ended, leaving me reeling. Amanda and Richard had escalated their attack, filing a complaint with the authorities to shift the blame entirely onto me. I immediately called Evelyn, who was just as furious as I was. "This is a desperation move," she said. "They're trying to muddy the waters and slow us down. But if they've gone to the authorities, it could complicate things. We need to act fast." She instructed me to stay calm and provide her with every document, email, and piece of evidence I had. Meanwhile, Frank started pulling together testimony from witnesses who could corroborate Richard's involvement in the schemes. Later that day, Evelyn and I met with Detective Hayes to explain the situation. Mr. Hart has been framed by his estranged wife and her associate, Richard Owens, Evelyn said confidently, handing over a stack of evidence. This is a coordinated effort to deflect attention from their own fraudulent activities. The detective listened carefully, her expression unreadable. We'll review this, she said finally. But until we've completed our investigation, Mr. Hart remains a person of interest. I left the station feeling like the walls were closing in. Amanda and Richard had managed to weaponize the legal system against me, and now I was fighting battles on two fronts. That evening, I received an email from Richard. "You should have walked away, Jake. Now it's too late." His arrogance made my blood boil, but it also strengthened my resolve. Richard wanted me to crumble under the pressure, to back off and let him win. But I refused to give him that satisfaction. Frank called later that night with a critical update. "Jake, we've found the smoking gun," he said, excitement in his voice. "What is it?" I asked, barely daring to hope. "One of Richard's former employees came forward," Frank explained. "He has emails and financial records proving that Richard orchestrated the entire scheme, and that Amanda was complicit. This is the evidence we need to clear your name and take them both down." My chest flooded with relief, but it was quickly tempered by anger. Amanda and Richard had dragged me through hell, but their lies were finally catching up with them. The next morning, Evelyn filed a motion to introduce the new evidence. The court accepted it, and a hearing was scheduled for the following week. When Amanda learned about the new evidence, she called me, her voice trembling with panic. "Jake, you don't have to do this," she said. "We can figure something out. We can." "No, Amanda," I interrupted, my voice steady. "You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." Her sobs on the other end of the line didn't move me. I'd given her every chance to come clean, to do the right thing, and she'd chosen betrayal time and time again. Now, the truth was finally coming out, and Amanda and Richard were about to face the consequences of their actions. The day of the hearing arrived, and I walked into the courthouse feeling a mix of anxiety and determination. Evelyn had assured me that the new evidence was airtight, but I couldn't shake the fear that Amanda and Richard had another trick up their sleeves. Amanda was already seated at the defendant's table, her face pale but composed. Richard sat beside her, his usual smug confidence on full display. As the proceedings began, Evelyn presented the evidence Frank had uncovered: emails, financial records, and testimony from Richard's former employee. This evidence clearly shows that Mr. Owens orchestrated the fraudulent real estate transactions and used Mrs. Hart as a willing accomplice, Evelyn said. My client, Mr. Jake Hart, had no knowledge of these activities and was intentionally framed to divert attention from the true perpetrators. The courtroom was silent as Evelyn walked the judge through the documents, piece by piece. The emails were damning, detailing how Richard had coached Amanda on forging my signature and transferring funds into their joint accounts. When Richard's former employee took the stand, his testimony was the final nail in the coffin. Mr. Owens instructed us to falsify documents and create a paper trail leading back to Jake Hart, he said. He told us it was necessary to protect himself and Amanda from legal exposure. Richard's lawyer tried to discredit the testimony, but the evidence was overwhelming. As the judge reviewed the documents, I glanced at Amanda. She was biting her lip, her composure cracking. Richard, on the other hand, looked furious, his hands clenched into fists. When it was Amanda's turn to testify, she hesitated before taking the stand. Her lawyer asked her a series of questions designed to paint her as a victim, claiming she'd been manipulated by Richard and had only followed his instructions out of fear. But Evelyn was ready. "Mrs. Hart," Evelyn said, her voice sharp, "are we to believe that you forged your husband's signature, transferred money without his knowledge, and signed fraudulent contracts? All because you were afraid of Mr. Owens?" "Yes," Amanda said quietly, her eyes darting to Richard. "Then how do you explain these emails?" Evelyn asked, holding up a printed exchange where Amanda had discussed the scheme in detail with Richard. "They don't sound like the words of a scared woman. They sound like the words of an active participant." Amanda's face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might finally admit the truth. But instead, she doubled down. "I didn't know what I was doing," she said, her voice trembling. Richard made it sound like everything was legal. Her lies were so blatant, so transparent, that I almost laughed. But the judge wasn't amused. Richard took the stand next, his arrogance on full display. He denied everything, claiming the evidence was fabricated and accusing me of orchestrating the entire situation to save myself. But Evelyn tore his testimony apart, presenting the financial records that tied him directly to the offshore accounts. By the end of the hearing, the judge's expression was grim. "I've seen enough," she said, her voice firm. "The evidence clearly implicates Mr. Owens and Mrs. Hart in a coordinated effort to defraud and frame Mr. Jake Hart. I'm ordering an immediate freeze on all accounts tied to Mr. Owens and Mrs. Hart, and I'm recommending criminal charges be filed against both parties." Relief washed over me as the judge's words sank in. For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. As the courtroom emptied, Amanda approached me, her face streaked with tears. "Jake," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was scared." "Save it," I said coldly, cutting her off. "You made your choices, Amanda. Now you have to live with them." Richard shot me a venomous glare as he was escorted out by his lawyers, but I didn't care. The truth had finally come out, and their lies had been exposed for the world to see. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The fight wasn't completely over, but for the first time, I could see a light at the end of the tunnel. The courtroom victory was a turning point, but the aftermath of Amanda and Richard's betrayal lingered like a storm cloud. The judge's recommendation for criminal charges meant the legal system would soon catch up to them. But for me, the battle was far more personal. Evelyn called me the day after the hearing with good news. "The accounts have been frozen, and we filed the necessary paperwork to protect you from any further claims," she said. "With the evidence we've provided, the district attorney is moving forward with charges against both Amanda and Richard." Hearing that gave me a sense of closure. Richard would finally pay for his schemes, and Amanda would face consequences for her role in the fraud. But it didn't erase the pain of what they'd done or the damage they'd caused. Amanda's last plea. A week later, Amanda showed up at my door. I debated whether to answer, but something inside me needed to hear what she had to say. She stood there, clutching her purse, her face pale and drawn. "Can I come in?" she asked hesitantly. I stepped aside, but I didn't invite her to sit. Instead, I crossed my arms and waited for her to speak. She began, her voice shaky. "I wanted to say I'm sorry, Jake, for everything." Her words felt hollow, but I let her continue. "I got caught up in something I didn't understand," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. "Richard made it sound like it was all perfectly legal, like it was a way for us to build a better future. I didn't realize how far it had gone until it was too late." I stared at her, my emotions a mix of anger and pity. "You didn't realize?" I asked coldly. "You forged my signature, stole from me, and lied to my face for months. Don't tell me you didn't know what you were doing." She flinched, but didn't argue. "I made mistakes," she said quietly. "But I never wanted to hurt you, Jake. I swear." "Then why did you do it?" I demanded. Amanda's tears spilled over, and for the first time, her mask of defiance cracked. "Because I was selfish," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted more excitement, more freedom, more everything. And I didn't care who I hurt to get it." Her honesty caught me off guard, but it didn't change anything. "I don't know what you want me to say," I said finally. "You made your choices, Amanda, and now you have to live with the consequences." She nodded, wiping her tears. "I know. I hope one day you can forgive me." I didn't respond. Forgiveness felt like an impossible concept after everything she'd done. Moving forward, the weeks that followed were a blur of depositions and meetings with lawyers. But as the legal process unfolded, I began to rebuild my life. I moved into a new apartment, sold the house that had been a constant reminder of Amanda's betrayal, and started focusing on myself for the first time in years. Frank stayed in touch, providing updates on the case. Richard had been charged with multiple counts of fraud and faced significant prison time. Amanda, while not facing the same penalties, was being held accountable for her involvement. The divorce was finalized with no contest from Amanda. She didn't fight for the house, the savings, or anything else. It was as if she knew she didn't deserve to. One evening, Evelyn called to check in. "You did it, Jake," she said. "You stood your ground and came out stronger for it." "I couldn't have done it without you and Frank," I replied. But the truth was, I'd also learned a lot about myself. Amanda's betrayal had shattered the illusion of our marriage. But it had also forced me to confront the ways I'd ignored the warning signs and let her toxicity fester. Now, I was determined to never let that happen again. Reflection. Looking back, I realized Amanda and Richard's betrayal wasn't just a lesson in deception. It was a lesson in resilience. I'd been blindsided, broken, and nearly defeated, but I'd fought back and reclaimed my life. To anyone reading this who's been betrayed, trust your instincts, gather your strength, and don't let anyone take your power away. You're stronger than you think, and there's always a way forward, even when it feels like the world is against you.